So let's talk about the Green Team, aka the Irish. Let's talk about how they started from the bottom. Now they're here. How they use politics, corruption, absolutely as well, and how they got out of the bottom of the barrel, dominating firefighters and police officers in heavily unionized occupations. Let's talk about that real quick.
Irish Catholics, rather than the Scotch-Irish Protestants who made up most of the emigration from Ireland before that time. As in Britain, the Irish in the United States typically settled in those large port cities most readily accessible, notably Boston and New York, where cargo vessels docked. Few came on passenger ships. As in Britain, the Irish in the United States took the lowest skilled, hardest, most menial, and dangerous jobs. Many were destitute, having exhausted all their worldly possessions on the voyage. They were concentrated in one occupation, unskilled labor, more so than any other immigrant group, and many never rose any further. They lived packed into decaying, filthy slums without indoor running water or any effective means of sewage disposal. Their own ways of living added to their problems. Fighting gave Irish neighborhoods a reputation as dangerous places from New York to New Orleans to Milwaukee. This fighting extended from individual brawls to organized street gangs and terrorist organizations, such as had existed in Ireland. In some Irish neighborhoods in New York, policemen traveled only in groups of 6. Police vans became known as paddy wagons because the prisoners in them were so often Irish. The lack of cleanliness in Irish neighborhoods, including pigs rooting in the streets, promoted the spread of disease like cholera, which had been virtually unknown in the United States for generations. Alcoholism also rendered the Irish undesirable as neighbors or employees. The number of saloons in Boston rose by almost 50% in just 3 years during the influx of the Irish in the 1840s. When the Irish moved into many neighborhoods, the exodus of non-Irish residents began. In parts of 19th century New York, Negroes were preferred to the Irish as tenants. Employment advertisements, even for lowly jobs, often used the stock phrase, "No Irish need apply."
So let's well, I'm gonna leave a recording of some clips from some documentaries and some archives for some books to go further in the discussion. But I listened to Mace Jackson. He's a radio host in Chicago, and he's involved in politics, and he was talking about basically how a city. I'm gonna leave a clip of that in the video of how his city, and how the Irish did what they did and how they came from the bottom and where they're at now, and a lot of corruption, a lot of politics, but they dominate the police force, things of that nature. And it's interesting stuff, right? Just looking at it from the outside, just seeing like how every group tend to have a lane in which they choose to dominate in and to be good at. The Jews have chosen entertainment. They chose the financial sectors. They chose diamonds. Like they got that shit on lock. Like that's their shit to the point where like you got to go through them to get on. The Germans are known for their craftsmanship and making shit like their vehicles and their scientists. After World War II, we hired all their crazy ass scientists and brought them to teach in our schools in America. You know what I mean? Like every group has the lane in which they went into, and I'm just looking at it, just acknowledging, just learning, taking notes and shit. But I noticed one thing, like Yvette Cornell, if you listen to her channel, basically what she's trying to articulate is that black people should be the new, we should get on that Irish welfare, right? That's the terminology, because they dominate police officers, firefighters, and they also dominate politics, right? And I guess she wants us to take that space, and I'm not saying whether she's right or wrong with that. It has already been done. I don't know if that's the case, if that could be done again. And one thing that's funny, May said today on Facebook that, and this is his lane, politics, just like Yvetica, but he's not, he's more realistic on what can actually be done as opposed to her having fictitious views of, how government's going to work. If you listen to her lately, she's saying, I am a capitalist, which she's not. She's a socialist. She's a leftist. But I guess it dawned on her that, well, she can't ask for the redistribution of wealth without supporting capitalism, because people got to go out and get the capital for you to redistribute it. So I guess that's the way she's a capitalist. But we know that black people are overrepresented in government work because the private sector is fucking with us. But we're still underrepresented in police officers, firefighters, and when it comes to unions, right? And those are things that she wants to push black people into, as we see those other groups have already dominated those things, the Irish for one, and they have lock and key on it. And, you know, that's just interesting dynamic there. It's like she's trying to push us into something that is just as discriminatory towards black people, right? You got a lot of people at the union hall sitting on the bench waiting to get picked up that are qualified, and they're not getting hired because, you know, other immigrants and other groups practicing tribalism, and they're looking out for each other, and people have preferences for who they want to work for, things of that nature. But it's funny though, looking at where the Irish have came from, how they were once on the outside. They were once the black sheep of, you know, whatever. Like, there were times when they were treated worse than black folks, right? When the black folks, when they got on the street, the black folks will move to, as Mace Jackson said in his video, what I'm gonna put a clip into. There were times when we were preferred more for the military, and even it was more acceptable for us to live in a mixed neighborhood than they were. Like, and it's interesting seeing like how they use politics, corruption to get out of that. But the one thing I noticed that Thomas Sowell points out is that how, out of all the European immigrant groups, though they dominated politics, they're still the least, they're the poorest, right? They don't have, like the Jews, the Italians, the Germans, all those other groups have more resources because the lanes in which they went into had better market values. So even though they've achieved some level of success by going into the trades heavily unionized and going into police force and all that, and they're in a space, but out of all the other Europeans, they're at the bottom of that space because, you know, they chose to fortify themselves in politics, where other groups fortify themselves in the actual skilled labor that had market values. Those other groups did better, and that's just like, you know, that's why I say Yvette Cornell, yeah, there's a segment of black folks who need to go in that lane, but there's a segment of folks who need to be, like Dr. Boyce Watkins argues, entrepreneurs and take over industries and, you know, sell stuff that everybody needs. Because that's the solution. It's not either or whatever. Like Yvette says, it's only this way, this is how you can do it. And Boyce doesn't say that, but he acknowledges that you're not going to get where you want to be just dependent on the government and the state to redistribute wealth from other folks to give it to you. That's just not going to happen. But that's interesting though. Even Thomas Sowell points out too in his book, right? White liberals, black rednecks, or I forgot how to say it. White rednecks, black liberals, where he talks about how like Scottish and Irish, how that culture is part of the problem. Even like when you look at like East Asians are the top of the totem pole with Asians, but there are other groups that are not. And if you compare their culture, and you'll see why that is. For some reason, we have an issue when we point to culture being part of the problem with where we stand. A lot of, like, there was a difference between black folks in the North and black folks in the South. When black folks started migrating from the South to the North, like, they had issues. Like, the black folks were like, it wasn't even on some I'm better than you, but there was a different cultural element, and they was not feeling that shit when it came up. But that element of what we call ghetto and black culture is not even black culture. Black people inherited from the Scottish who migrated over to the South. So it's not even black culture that we go around saying it's us, and it's not even us. It was theirs. If you look at the history and how they acted over in Ireland, how they got dominated and shit on by the Europeans, and not only that, but they got shitted on by other Irish who were Protestant and not Catholic. That's another thing too. I hear a lot of videos on YouTube about religion and how the religion is why black people are on what they're on and how it's keeping them back. And I'm like, that can't be the case, being that all groups tend to be magical. The Irish are heavily Catholic. That was one of their faults when they came here. The Protestants wasn't fucking with them. They wanted to stamp out Catholicism. You know, there was wars fought over it, and they kept their magicalness. And in fact, their magicalness helped them, you know, obtain success, because the power of the Vatican and the power of the church and whatnot, and what they use their resources for to support each other and support their communities, it helped them. So this idea that religion is what's the key factor in the failures of black folks, I can't say that, being that it's not. It's like the religion is what it is, but what you do with it is what matters. And apparently we're not doing with it what it teaches. For one, obviously look at our situation with the wedlock out of birth rate and inheritance and building shit up for your kids and all other stuff. But every other group is magical, and they tend to not let that affect how they operate financially and stuff like that, and how they get forth. So I can't make the argument. And they're a great example of people who, like, they were targeted for their race. I also hear the one argument too that's funny that people still try to make it that, why won't the poor whites link with the poor blacks? And I'm like, I mean, that has happened in pieces and stuff like that, and the Bacon's Rebellion. We've seen elements of that, but in reality, every group is tribalistic, right? You think the Irish were shitted on because they were at the bottom of the barrel economically in Europe. The British was all up in their ass, but part of them was because of their race. So it's like, even when you remove race, they still had other issues that held them back. Class was one of them, education. So this idea that, the great unifier, which was brilliant on, if you want to talk about white supremacy, is whiteness. Despite the Jews, the Italians, the Germans, not all fucking with each other, all going back and forth, fighting each other, killing each other, raping and pillaging each other. In America, that whiteness united them. So again, it's delusional to say, well, why won't the poor whites come fight with the poor blacks? And it's like, you reaching, dog. Like, no group does that. Every group is going to be tribalistic. And now you look at where the Irish are at today. There's 50 million blacks in America. There are about 30 million Irish in America. So it's like, and why you can't really, like, as much as you want to break down the Irish story and how they went through, I guess the whiteness messes it up where you can't compare and contrast it to what blacks went through, because whiteness has helped them as well. And that's all demographics. Jews could change their name and get on. Irish could convert from Catholicism to Protestant, and that gave them a little bit of a leg up. So whiteness, the whole thing with whiteness is definitely it was a genius thing to do in order to maintain or to grow white supremacy. It definitely was, because when you think, like, just watching some of the documentaries and listening to some of the rhetoric that was painted towards the Irish, is like, how did they go from that to where they're at now? And like, if you listen to what was said about what was some of the things that are said about illegal immigrants now, those were said about legal immigrants who were Irish back in the day. It's weird how history, it just constantly repeats itself, and what people are asking for, what they wish would happen, it's all freaking magical, and it's never going to happen. And even if you remove the element of race, there's still other barriers, classism, and like, we want to focus on race so much, but I'm like, when the British were getting in the Irish ash, it was white on white crime, right? So it's like, even when you remove race from the situation, there's still going to be these barriers, and that survival of the fittest food chain that exists. But I'm done talking. I'm gonna play some clips of documentaries. I'm gonna play Mace Jackson, his little segment where he was breaking down, because he's heavily involved in politics in Chicago, and it is what it is. They started from the bottom, and this is how they did it. Is interesting to see.
The country. In the United States, as in Britain, politics became a major area of Irish success. A key ingredient in their political success were traits long observed in Ireland: Irish wit and adaptability, a gift for oratory, a certain vivacity, and a warm human quality that made them the best of good fellows at all times, especially in election campaigns, enabled the Irish to rise rapidly from ward heelers to city bosses and to municipal, state, and federal officials of high distinction. Graft and violence were often also part of the Irish political machines of the 19th and 20th centuries. The Irish were Democrats, with both a small and a large D. They brought with them a hatred of aristocracy, exclusiveness, or pretensions of superiority. A major factor in the success of the political machine was that it had its roots in communities of ordinary working people, and was keenly aware of and responsive to their felt needs, in contrast to distant middle-class reformers to whom the masses were objects of experiment or reformation. By the late 19th century, Irish political machines dominated American cities from New York to San Francisco. Individual Irish political bosses remained in charge of their respective machines for decades. Richard J. Daley, perhaps the last of the classic machine bosses, was mayor of Chicago for more than 20 years when he died in office in 1976. Political domination meant control of a variety of municipal patronage jobs, from exalted positions like judge to to lowly occupations like street cleaner that were still very attractive to those to whom any steady job was a blessing. By and large, however, Irish political success did not translate into economic advancement for the Irish masses. As late as 1890, 42% of all Irish Americans were servants, and many others were unskilled laborers. The massive inflow of Irish immigrants led to Irish control of the Roman Catholic Church in America. Even after numerous German, Polish, Italian, and other Catholic immigrants arrived, the Irish retained their dominance in the hierarchy. The Church, in turn, played a major role in the assimilation of the Irish, the promotion of education, and the discouragement of violence and drinking among them. It also discouraged the festive Irish wake and the huge funeral processions which those involved could not readily afford, and which undermined the Irish in the eyes of their fellow Americans. The growing acculturation of the Irish slowly produced tangible economic results, though the Irish remained the slowest rising European ethnic group in the United States. Still, their head start had them generally ahead of the Jews and Italians at the beginning of the 20th century. While Irish immigrants continued to start at the bottom in manual labor occupations, the second-generation Irish were increasingly white-collar workers or occasionally professionals. The Irish were also prominent in the labor union movement. At the beginning of the 20th century, 50 out of 110 presidents of the AFL unions were of Irish ancestry. They were seldom businessmen, however, again a pattern going back to Ireland. With the passing years, the American-born Irish began to outnumber the Irish immigrants. By 1920, native-born Irish Americans outnumbered immigrants from Ireland by more than 3 to 1. Today, Irish Americans of the first and second generation combined are outnumbered by Irish Americans of older vintage by 10 to 1.
When the Irish came, the city was in a fever. Since the time of the Great Famine, they'd come streaming off the boats. And they got a right warm welcome.
Go back to Ireland, you dumb mitt! You remember that, you frog Irish! Get back in the boot, Paddy!
I only came 2 hours downriver from Hellgate, but they all took me for an immigrant. Why not? There were 1,000 different accents in New York, and to the natives, you see, it was all the same.
Hammond is here to take the chill off your soul and the weight off your heart.
Welcome to America, son. Your long, arduous journey is over.
Go back to your own country.
Vote Tammany!
America for America!
Machiavellian, is that the word? They think
Charles,
everything.
Charles, I'm telling you, I live this. Green, you're on the Talk Chicago 1690. Keep it quick. Green, going once, going twice. Green, I wanted to hear.
That was the green team, maybe.
The green team. Charles, you know what? People have been asking me, what does the green team mean actually? And I just assume people knew. But Charles, when I say the green team, I am referring to our overwhelming Irish population that dominates the political system.
The great Irish tradition that dominates Chicago politics and has for many years. Whether you go back to Richard J. on through
Kennelly,
Richard M,
you go all the way.
Michael Madigan, through
the green
Burke,
team,
through
the green team.
Some of the names you don't know, you never heard before, but who are power players. Was it George Dunn? Remember him?
George Dunn, Walsh, Construction. Man. You guys, let me tell you, the green team is part of. It's the big. You know what?
They're the most powerful, I think, political subdivision, if you want to talk about it in terms of ethnicity, in the city of Chicago.
In the state of Illinois.
Thank you.
The green team. Those of Notre Dame fandom. Ladies and gentlemen, you are tuned in to the Talk of Chicago. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion, NTA Academy.
The Talk of Chicago and the voice of the nation.
Oh, I lost it right there, guys. That was a blooper. So yes, for those that don't understand the green team, the green team is really, Chicago is dominated by the Irish, right? Like, just period, point blank. You want to get it done, they got to sanction it from top to bottom. To make any deals, that's how it goes. And so when we refer to the green team, it is, before I used to say things that would be offensive, but I think the green team allows us to say what we want to say without
It is what it is. You know, you got to tell the color like it is. We talk about black political activity, then there has been, you know.
Well, it's like we can't, and it's funny because they wear it on their sleeve.
Right.
Right? Like, they don't make any bones about being Irish, right? Like, they straight up be like, yo,
we gonna dye the river green.
Think about that. The river is green. Like, right, okay.
Celebrate it.
It's a holiday.
You're gonna
like,
put pollutant in the river and celebrate it.
It's vegetable dye.
Whatever. But it didn't belong there. God didn't put it in there. So they can do that and get away with it. I mean, you know.
And not even get away with it. We'll go down and look.
And how many small businesses do you see that will be Callahan's, you know, catering, have that Irish,
Shamrock.
that Shamrock on it, because they know that's an Irish company and they're going to do business with an Irish company the same way black people. We got to learn, because I got to learn, we all got to learn to do business with black people the way they've been doing business with Irish people. They put that Shamrock on there because they know it's going to attract a certain clientele, and that certain people are going to respond to that Shamrock and do business, because they remember when they got here and the hard times they had trying to establish themselves in Chicago.
Can I tell you something? The Irish, when they first came to Chicago, were looked at worse than black people. When the Irish first came here, if an Irishman moved on a black person's block, the black people moved. Right?
Cold-blooded.
The black people moved. And they made a conscious decision to take politics and police, right? Politics and police. Think about the history of the paddy roller, right? Usually the Irish guys, the paddy rollers, man, y'all don't even want me to go down this path. But anyway, here in Chicago, the Irish decided that they were going to make their play in politics and police. So if you look at the enclaves, the police typically come from an Irish white Catholic high school, right? The Mount Carmels, the St. Rita's, you got three options when you're a white kid in Chicago, a white Irish kid. This ain't a diss. You go to high school, you go to an Irish Catholic high school. When you leave, they tell you to either if you don't go to college, they tell you to go to a junior college and get your 2-year degree. At that same point, they tell you to apply for a city job, a state job, a county police. They know that during the 2 years that you're getting your degrees, your associates will be enough to allow you to get one of those jobs. You then, after you get your associates, become a fireman, a plumber, or whatever, a police officer. And you go into and you get your $70,000, $80,000 a year job, where then you can get that $70,000 or $80,000 a year job and get $200,000 a year in overtime. Then you can move back into your old neighborhood next door to your mom or your family and send your kids to the same parish that you went to before. They got a whole system of ensuring that they populate and make sure that their community does well. You want to see it in action? Drive down 95th Street and look at Beverly. Perfect example. You want to see Irish action at work? Again, drive down 95th Street and look at how many Irish relic stores. And it is a testament to the fact that they came, they said, we're not going to do a bunch of different things. We're going to find some places to make a niche, and we're going to bury into those places, and then we're going to enforce our will and impose it in those areas. Now, doing it by politics allowed them to not only take political power, but it allowed them to legislate the wealth of their friends and families.
Look, also, all you have to do, too, when you think about that, that power base, politics, law enforcement, building trades unions.
Right. And
you know that?
Yep.
Building trades unions.
And the church.
And the Catholic Church.
Right.
The Archdiocese, but that's almost a given. But building trades unions. I mean, the church thing started in Ireland, in here. But the other stuff that they have co-opted and taken control of, unions, politics, what was the other one? Law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I ain't complaining about it. I mean,
I'm just saying we got to get ours.
They did it. But look at that model and say, hey, can we do the same thing?
Do you know that they have once a year, or not once a year, but a couple times a year, a giant meeting of all of them, the Irish Fellowship, and they all get a big giant banquet room, and it's like they all convene, and it's like man, and I ain't even finna mess with that, because let me just tell you, I do want to start my car. But again, guys, none of that is a diss. It is, you wonder how the power happens. And Charles, that trade union piece, that's part of what I was saying. When you go to an Irish Catholic high school, what they do is they channel you, right? Like they say, son, man, go fill out the city, counties. They tell you to go fill out so you can get a job at one of these places. And if you're already in the union, then your dad blesses you in, you come in, and you get, by the time you're freaking 21, you're making $80,000 a year as a tradesman, and you can buy in your own neighborhood. Plus you got the skills to do all the other stuff. We're going to NTA.
Okay, hey, Mace.
Yeah.
Here's a story out of Charlotte.
Everything worthwhile has personal cost.
Whose fault is it anyway that half the family is cops?
Let it be my father.
It couldn't have been a doctor or an accountant, something that doesn't involve firearms.
Family dinner would be a lot less interesting.
Given what I just had to go through with the grand jury, I'd take a lot less interesting any day.
Sorry I had to go through that. You know, there's a whole other world out there, boys. One that would have a lot more thugs on the street were it not for families like ours. No. I'm just saying, Pop, none of us had to become cops. It's not a birthright or a genetic code. It's a choice.
Deliver these good and fervent folk to the polls on a regular basis, and there'll be a handsome price for each vote goes Tammany's way.
My father gave his life making this country what it is. Murdered by the British with all of his men on the 25th of July, Anno Domini 1814. You think I'm gonna help you befoul his legacy? By giving this country over to them what's had no hand in the fighting for it? Why, because they come off a boat crawling with lice and begging you for soup?
You're a great one for the fighting, Bill, I know. But you can't fight forever.
I can go down doing it.
And you will.
What did you say?
I said you're turning your back on the future.
Not our future.
That document makes you a citizen. This one makes you a private in the Union Army. Now go fight for your country. Next.
Sign here, sir. Or make your mark.
In Ireland, in England, and in the United States, the Irish kept pigs, chickens, and other creatures living in their homes, even in urban communities. The 18th century Irish were described as lazy at work, but spiritedly active at play. Initiative was undermined by laws which made a tenant's improvements the property of the landlord, who could then raise the rent because the property was more valuable. Neither education nor entrepreneurship was part of the Irish tradition. Pre-invasion Gaelic society was hostile to literacy, and medieval Ireland was the only nation in Europe that did not build a single university during the Middle Ages. Self-reliance was also lacking. The Irishman was habituated to working for others, not striking out on his own. The Irish had little feel for trade and commerce, and seldom chose such careers for themselves or their children. Alcohol and alcoholism added to the problems of the Irish for centuries, both in Ireland and overseas. This book is continued at this point on the other side of this cassette. Alcohol and alcoholism added to the problems of the Irish for centuries, both in Ireland and overseas. Widespread drunkenness was noted by travelers in 16th century Ireland, and as late as 1970, the percentage of personal income spent on alcohol in Ireland was the highest of any country in Europe. In the United States during World War II, the percentage of men rejected for military service for chronic alcoholism was higher among the Irish than among Negroes, Italians, or Jews. Similar patterns existed in World War I. Contemporary studies of Irish Americans show that they drink more and more frequently than any other ethnic group in the United States. Fighting was another feature of life in Ireland that was to mark the Irish wherever they went. The Fighting Irish was a cliché long before it was adopted by American sports reporters as a nickname for Notre Dame athletic teams. Irish fighting was the impulsive brawl rather than the implacable vendetta of the Italians. This fighting could range from man-to-man combat to the mass melee known as a Donnybrook, named for a town in Ireland. While the Irish had these various social handicaps, they also developed many skills and traits that would ultimately work to their advantage at home and abroad. Over the centuries, they slowly abandoned Gaelic, their native tongue, for English, giving them advantages over other immigrants to the United States, Canada, and Great Britain. They developed a variety of grassroots organizations to cope with their disadvantages and oppressions under the penal laws in Ireland, and these provided both group cohesion and organizing skills that would later pay off in many ways, from the struggle for the independence of Ireland to Irish-run political machines that dominated American cities for generations. The verbal facility and human touch of the Irish was a key ingredient in their success in politics as well as in the clergy, writing, and the law. The Irish fascination with words has a long history. There was a constant jibing and joshing among themselves, and a genius for the apt nickname. They filled their language with poetic images and metaphors. The Irish developed the moral standards of a people tyrannized by an alien power, regarding the established institutions as illegitimate, evasion as a shield, and open defiance as suicidal. They were constantly tipping their hats to their overlords and lowered their eyes in the presence of the gentry, but at other times overcompensated with boasting and bluster. A 19th century observer described the Irishman as full of insolence when he is not cringing. Begging from private individuals and acceptance of public charity were long-standing patterns among the 19th century Irish, in their often desperate struggles for survival. Often families went begging through the countrysides, or the women and children might go when the man was too proud. Later generations of the Irish in Britain and America would also become wards of public charity. Many of those who left Ireland in the 19th century fit the description of Irish immigrants given by a Canadian writer. Men have come here who were unable to spell, who never knew what it was to have a shoe to their foot in Ireland. Whatever the characteristics of the Irish that formed over the centuries in Ireland, the massive migrations that started with the great famines of the 1840s took them to very different lands and new influences. By 1891, nearly 40% of all people born in Ireland lived outside Ireland. Some went to other parts of Great Britain, but of those who left the British Isles in the century after 1825, 90% went to the United States. Ireland was one of the few countries in the world with sustained declines in population for decades. In 1841, there were more than 8 million people in Ireland. By 1926, just over 4 million. Even today, there are not as many people living in Ireland as in the 1840s. There are more people of Irish ancestry in the United States than in Ireland.
Hard-drinking Irishman. He was, in fact, a fourth-generation Scots Protestant, unfailingly courteous and nearly teetotal. He was also a superb politician who took care of his mainly immigrant constituency, providing jobs for the unemployed, coal in winter, and orphanages, hospitals, and shelters for the poor.
He was one of the first people who saw the power of mass politics in the cities. And for all his thievery, there was the recognition of mobilizing this mass of people to some political end. I think he's not remembered for that. He's remembered for the $50 million that he stole, which if you wanted to get the equivalent today, multiply times 10.
Accelerating New York's already explosive growth still further, Tweed and his associates brazenly siphoned off staggering sums from the hundreds of city projects under their control, and helped robber barons like Jay Gould and Jim Fisk make off with still more. There were lucrative contracts for grateful builders who happily paid Tammany's leaders enormous cash kickbacks to get them. There were thousands of jobs for Tammany's loyal constituents who gratefully voted Tammany's leaders back in power. New York's upper classes, meanwhile, professed to be appalled, but quietly looked the other way as real estate values in the city skyrocketed. It all worked like a machine, a political machine, and no one knew how that machine worked better than William Tweed, who by 1870 had concentrated more power in himself than anyone in the city's history.
It was Tweed who helped maneuver the money through the city council, or the Board of Aldermen as it then was, for the Brooklyn Bridge, for Central Park, for a lot of the road repair and the creation of streets and avenues in uptown Manhattan. Now, he made a lot of money with that. And it was absolutely corrupt.
Tweed's first position was Commissioner of Public Works. He was no fool. And if you know where the sewer lines are going to go, and if you know where the new street extensions are going to be opened up, and you get there first, and you buy up that territory, all you got to do is sit back, wait, and boom, the price explodes. So Tweed, in fact, became one of the largest real estate owners in the city.
I think there was something in him, some overpowering appetite that he could never slake. He couldn't have one mistress, he had to have two. He couldn't have one roast beef, he had to have four, you know, and he couldn't have two judges, he had to have them all, you know, and finally it caught up with him and destroyed him.
In 1870, as newspaper editors and indignant reformers began questioning where Tweed's lavish lifestyle came from, all eyes turned to the still unfinished county courthouse on Chambers Street, a special project of Tweed's. Begun in 1858, it was supposed to have cost $350,000. 12 years later, the price tag had reached $13 million and kept right on rising.
Somehow this one building, which is actually quite a nice building, wound up costing more than the entire Houses of Parliament. Well, you know, the deal was straightforward. We want to buy a lot of chairs. How much does that chair cost? Let's say $5. No, says Tweed, you don't mean $5, you mean $50. Oh, I do? All right. And, you know, give me the chair, $50, you know, 20 back for you, and so forth.
Even the most worldly New Yorkers knew that something had to be done. People begin to tire of holding their noses, George Templeton Strong wrote, and are looking about in a helpless way for some remedy.
Poverty, discrimination, anti-Catholic prejudice ensures the city's Irish minority remains stuck at the bottom of the ladder.
Anti-Irish sentiment was anti-Catholic sentiment, and there were some horrific examples of it in 19th and early 20th century America.
Boston's North End, where we are now, becomes the heart of Boston's Irish community. It's just a few steps from the docks where the ships are unloading. All of these apartments would house 30, 40 people. You're just paying for a spot on a bed or a place to sleep. No indoor plumbing, no washing facilities, very little ventilation.
For one man, enough is enough.
They did what?
This is Patrick J. McGuire. Tenacious, Catholic, fiercely Irish-American. Born in Ireland, educated and ambitious, he realizes America offers a unique way to help his people escape poverty and oppression, using the tools of American democracy to win political power with Boston's first Irish mayor.
Gentlemen, the time has come. We must make our voices heard. Yes. To Boston! To Boston! To the Irish! Yes!
In 1883, McGuire persuades fellow Irishman Hugh O'Brien to run.
Gentlemen, a few words from your first Irish candidate. Thank you. Thank you.
But with the Catholic Irish immigrant community in a minority, McGuire knows he'll need Protestant Yankee votes to win.
O'Brien has a timeless message for what he will do. He's going to cut taxes, but also not cut any services.
In 1884, for the first time ever, O'Brien wins a clear victory, showing a path out of poverty and injustice for all future immigrants.
McGuire's lasting political legacy is showing that the Irish people, or really any immigrant people, can have a home here, and that they will have.
William Maugear Tweed was born on April 3, 1823, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Raised in a middle-class family with Scottish-Irish roots, he apprenticed under his father as a chairmaker at 11, a saddler at 13, and a bookkeeper for a brushmaking firm, whose owner's daughter he would go on to marry at the age of 21. However, Tweed's excitable, even thrill-seeking nature led him to join the ranks of New York City's infamous volunteer fire department. Some historians say this was when he was first exposed to crime, as the volunteer fire brigades of his time functioned more as gangs, competing with each other across ethnic and geographic lines. There are multiple accounts of rivaling fire brigades brawling against one another when both arrived at the same burning building, neglecting to put out the fire. Known for his axe-wielding skills, Tweed fit in with the aggressive environment of volunteer firefighting, and soon rose to become foreman of the America's Fire Company No. 6 on which he worked. During his time, Big Six adopted the logo of a ferocious, snarling Bengal tiger. This symbol would go on to embody Tammany Hall's legacy under Tweed's leadership. In 1850, a spat with the chief engineer of Big Six led to his expulsion from the brigade. However, Tweed's exploits had caught the attention of the Democratic Party, which in turn entered him into the race for alderman of the 7th Ward, centered in the Lower East Side. And so, Tweed entered the world of Gilded Age politics, winning the alderman race in 1851. Over the course of his political career, he would hold positions as a state senator, congressman, and most importantly, Grand Sachem of Tammany Hall. Tweed's first exposure to the extortion and embezzlement that would define him in the years to come was in his career as a lawyer. Tweed received a certification to practice law from Judge George G. Barnard, although he had never went to law school and knew little about the subject, and proceeded to extort money from his clients under the guise of providing legal counsel. Tweed's relationship with the city of New York was a long and difficult one that lasted a staggering 22 years. Through his political scandals, viciousness, and embezzlements, he would indirectly build New York City from the ground up, culturally, politically, and economically.